When Marvel announced that they were bringing in Jonathan Hickman to reboot the X-Men, my first thought was, not another event. We'd just been through the most boring X-Men event ever, Age of X-Men, this brave new world-esque dystopia where Nate Gray controlled everything. That event flopped hard, like Shawn Michaels in the Hulk Hogan match. This was another weak story in a line of weak stories. The X-Men had been a mess for nearly 2 decades. The last time they really worked was when Grant Morrison retooled them in the early 2000s, and they haven't been right since then. No one really knows what to do with them, so when Marvel announced Hickman, I wasn't thrilled. He's not a bad writer, but he doesn't strike me as an X-Men writer. That's just not his thing, and House of X and Powers of X, or 10 as people like to say, proves that. It's not a bad story. In fact, it's really good. It's just not an X-Men story. He's using their names and likeness and powers, but this is a masterpiece of fan fiction, not a fix for the real characters. Here's the deal. The X-Men have one of the most convoluted storylines in fiction. This stuff is so confusing it makes Hawkman's origins look tame in comparison, and that's before you get to the time traveling. What Hickman decided to do was take that concept of time travel, play on it, and give us a new interpretation of the X-Men. When the story begins, we see Xavier in a Cerebro helmet watching mutants hatch from eggs saying his famous, "To me, my X-Men" line. We meet a bunch of diplomats who are invited to meet with Magneto, who's working with Xavier to found a new mutant country on the living island of Krakoa. Xavier plans on giving humans 3 drugs that will extend their lives and cure most diseases in exchange for recognizing this new mutant nation, allowing this new nation to handle all mutant issues and basically leaving the mutants alone. This is so contrary to everything Xavier is about that it's genuinely shocking to see it. Xavier's traditionally been the type who wants humans and mutants to live together. To see him acting not only as a separatist, but as an extremist is jarring. This is not the Xavier we know. And then we find out why, and this is where Hickman's take is really brilliant and actually fits into the X-Men lore quite well. And he does this by doing the impossible, making Moira McTaggart an interesting character. He makes her a mutant, a very unique mutant. She has a power of reincarnation. Every time she dies, she's reborn with the memories of her previous lives intact. So in utero, she's already aware of who she is, and as she grows up, she has to pretend to have a mind of a child until she's old enough to act like the adult she really is. Hickman plays on the trope of time travel by having Moira go through these repeated lives. The first time, she doesn't know what she is. The second time, she realizes something is up, knows of Xavier but ignores him, but when he comes out as a mutant, she tries to meet him but dies in a plane crash. Then Hickman ups the ante. In her third life, Moira sees mutation as a disease to be cured, and actually finds a way to get rid of mutations. But then she and her team are attacked by Mystique and Destiny, and that's where the whole thing takes a shift. Destiny can see the future, and discovers that Moira is a mutant and that part of her power allows her to hide herself from other mutants. This is why Xavier never realizes what she is. Destiny, however, will now always be able to detect Moira, so if Moira tries to wipe out the mutants again, Destiny will know before it happens and stop Moira. She then reveals that Moira's reincarnation isn't unlimited. Destiny sees only 10 or 11 lives Moira will have. If Moira dies before her power is activated at 13, that's it. So at some point, Moira may die before her powers even activate. Then Destiny has Pyro burn her to death slowly, so she'll remember what it's like to die that way, and to try to get her to help mutants rather than destroy them. And ironically, this is what Moira does, although none of it works. She tries working with Xavier, who she finds arrogant, but that fails, and they're killed by the Sentinels. That timeline seems to be the one that we're most familiar with, but it may not be the true timeline. She then tries telling him as soon as her power activates, and they create an all-mutant utopia, but they're again taken out by Sentinels. So she tries another route, killing the people who make the Sentinels, namely every member of the Trask family, but that fails, and she discovers that artificial intelligence would be created by someone else eventually, and they would use it and turn their sights on mutants. The next time around, she goes to Magneto instead of Xavier, but that fails. Then she tries Apocalypse, and that too fails. This leads up to her 10th life, the one we follow in the story, where she convinces Xavier and Magneto to work together. The whole setup is amazing because Hickman holds back information, so it makes everything we see the X-Men doing look completely odd, but there's a reason for their actions. Moira's 6th life. We don't initially get to see that life, but later it's revealed, and the events of that reshape all the choices she makes in her next lives. The deal is that mutants always lose. No matter what she does, no matter how she tries to change things, they always get wiped out. In her sixth life, she finds out why and who the real enemy is. Spoiler alert, it's not the humans, it's the phalanx, or essentially any machine intelligence. The mutants are the natural evolution of humans, but humans can use technology to enhance themselves, and over time that technology becomes sentient and basically takes over. And this is where Hickman gets slick, because Cypher, the mutant who can interpret any language, is the one behind talking to Krakoa and helping set up this new mutant utopia. But he's also bonded with Warlock, a rogue member of the Phalanx. And we get this moment right when Cypher first goes to Krakoa, where he touches the floor with his Phalanx arm and parts of the plant begin to change. For those who don't know, the Phalanx works similar to the Borg. If they infect you, you become one of them. So this is already being set in motion behind the scenes right at the start of the story. Hickman also hints that this may not be the real timeline either, even though major events like the genocide on Genosha that killed 16 million mutants and the decimation event where Scarlet Witch, who apparently isn't a mutant now, depowered another 1 million mutants, still happened. But there are weird things going on here. For example, we learn that Xavier is copying the minds of all mutants and storing them so they can be resurrected if they die. He's got the main database and 4 backups just in case. This may be one of the reasons Xavier can walk in this timeline. He's likely swapped bodies. In fact, these briefs and notes that Hickman adds to all the books tells us that a powerful telepath might even be able to swap their mind with a legacy or older version of their mind, and that Xavier has done this twice. Many of the character changes and dead characters that we know of are undone. Banshee is alive and well, Sabretooth is back to being a monster, Jean Grey calls herself Marvel Girl instead of Phoenix, but there are some people missing, namely just about anyone from the future or who can see the future. Bishop is around, but his powers don't give him any real insight to the future. But Cable and Rachel Summers or Grey aren't in the story. Neither is X-Man. That's interesting because all of them are Omega level mutants capable of seeing the future. Also not resurrected? Destiny. Now, there are still some people around who can do this. Jean Grey, Franklin Richards, Vulcan, and Quentin Quire are all powerful enough to see the future, or at least possible futures. So this may have been an oversight on Hickman's part, or maybe it's intentional. After all, we're told by Xavier that Krakoa can put people into a kind of permanent stasis where they're aware but can't move. It could be that this has been done by Xavier to mutants like Cable, X-Man, and Rachel to keep them out the way. Hickman also hints that Xavier pulling all the mutants together doesn't necessarily work out in his favor. Xavier has Mr. Sinister help him gather mutant DNA, but we learn that Sinister probably knows the truth about Moira and is playing all of them. This actually happens in one of Moira's lives and could be happening in the current timeline. The same question could be raised about Xavier though, who Moira admits to basically manipulating into crushing his dream of unity between humans and mutants. She admits to basically turning him into a villain, and then wonders what could happen as a result. This may be why Xavier rebooted his mind twice. He may have gone too far, or he may be trying to get around Moira's manipulation. This is all very interesting and honestly is a good read, but these aren't the X-Men. Nobody acts the way they should. Everything they do is off. For example, when they basically achieve their goals and celebrate, the celebration looks hollow, devoid of any genuine joy or happiness. And then we find out that Moira has faked one of her deaths, which may be what Destiny saw and is in hiding. So this whole thing may be one massive ruse, and it's not clear who's playing who. Is Moira manipulating Xavier and Magneto more than we know? What's up with Sinister? How much does he know? Apocalypse seems to accept this new world without complaint, which totally doesn't match his character at all. We're even told in the notes that if his original 4 horsemen reappeared, he'd ditch the new ones and there might be trouble. And then we have to wonder if Xavier and Magneto, or just Xavier himself, are playing Moira. And what about all the other alternate timelines? Do they still exist? Did they still happen? If so, then where are X-Men, Cable, and Rachel? Then you have people like Vulcan, Legion, and Franklin Richards, who are all fully capable of altering reality on a massive scale. Franklin, despite being a kid, is so powerful that he can do it by accident and unconsciously. If he intended to do it, he would be very difficult to stop, so why not use him to alter reality instead of going through these different lives? This leads me to think that it's a very real possibility that the characters we're seeing aren't the real deal. This may not be the real X-Men timeline. In other words, this isn't really the reboot of the X-Men, it's the end of the beginning of a story using those characters' names and likenesses and powers. And it's a fun read, but ultimately, it's just not the X-Men. These people aren't heroes, they're not villains either, they're just extremists and separatists. They're fighting to save their own kind, and that's it. The only reason you'd have any connection to these characters outside of Moira, who's the only one who's actually fleshed out, is because of the name recognition. Otherwise, you've got nothing else to work with. This story could have been told without the X-Men altogether. You could take Snapper Carr, make him Moira, and then do the same thing with DC characters. Still works. It's that wide open. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if Hickman came up with this idea as something unique and then just plugged the X-Men into the plot. It's not bad. Again, this is a really interesting story and works much better if you read it all at once because you get the full weight of what Hickman is doing. But it does read like fanfiction. Very well written fanfiction, but fanfiction nonetheless by someone who read up on the X-Men and knows enough about the lore to play with the story, but isn't committed to keeping the characters' personalities intact. If you can get past that, stop expecting it to be the X-Men you know and love and just let it be what it is, I think this is the beginning of potentially one of the best X-Men stories ever told. But if this is what Marvel plans on doing with the X-Men for real, then I think they've thoroughly ruined these characters. It's not just that they're no longer heroes, it's that there's no hope in any of these characters. They've gone back to being the underdogs, but under the guise of extremists and separatists. They've lost their humanity, the very thing that made these characters so interesting and relatable. If you can get around that, I'd say pick up the book. I figure Marvel is going to put out House of X and Powers of X into a trade, hopefully one trade, but who am I kidding? Marvel's greedy ass is going to put these out as 2 6-issue trades, both at like $20 a pop. I think it's worth it if you can just let go that these really aren't the X-Men you're looking for. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.